A Greek ambassador named Megasthenes spent years living at the court of the most powerful king in India. He had been sent by Seleucus Nicator, one of Alexander the Great's generals, to the city of Pataliputra around 302 BCE. What he saw there was so far beyond anything in the Greek world that when his report reached Rome 2 centuries later, the Roman writer Pliny the Elder included the numbers in his great encyclopedia, the Natural History. The army of Chandragupta Maurya, according to Pliny citing Megasthenes, consisted of 600,000 infantry, 30,000 cavalry, 9,000 war elephants, 8,000 chariots, almost 750,000 men in arms, plus the animals, plus the support staff, all fed every day by a single state. This is the story of how Chanakya and the Mauryan state actually pulled it off. The food, the granaries, the road system, and the chapters in an ancient Sanskrit book that describe a military supply chain so detailed it reads like a modern military logistics manual. Before going further, I want to flag 2 honesty notes. First, the 600,000 figure comes from a Greek source quoting an earlier Greek source. The geographer Strabo, also citing Megasthenes, gives 400,000. Modern historians treat these numbers as upper bounds, plausible for one of the largest states in the ancient world, probably representing total mobilization capacity rather than a single field army. Second, the famous Arthashastra, the Sanskrit treatise that describes Mauryan administration, was traditionally attributed to Kautilya, also called Chanakya. Modern scholarship is more cautious. Most major studies since Conglay in 1965, including recent work by Patrick Olivelle and Mark McLeish, place the surviving text's final redaction somewhere between the 1st and 3rd century CE, with earlier layers possibly dating back to Mauryan times. The system described is real. The exact dating is contested. With those caveats, the Arthashastra is the most detailed administrative manual to survive from any ancient civilization, and Book 2 of it deals almost entirely with how a state runs itself, including how it feeds an army. Let me start with the soldier's ration. The Arthashastra in Book 2, Chapter 15, on the superintendent of the storehouse, lays out specific food allocations. The translator R. Shamasastri's 1915 translation reads, 1 prasta of rice, pure and unsplit, 1/4 prasta of supa, and clarified butter or oil equal to 1/4 part of supa will suffice to form 1 meal of an arya. Let me unpack that. 1 prasta is a Mauryan-era volume measure equal to about half a liter, roughly 400 grams of dry rice per meal. Supa is the ancient Sanskrit word for a thick broth of pulses, the direct linguistic ancestor of modern dal. So a single meal for an upper caste soldier was approximately 400 grams of rice, 100 grams worth of dal, and a 1/4 portion of ghee or oil to that, plus salt, sugar, spices, and curd. The same chapter describes the equipment inside a Mauryan storehouse with extraordinary precision. Weighing balances, weights, grain measures, millstones called rochani, pestles, mortars, wooden contrivances for pounding rice, devices for splitting seeds, winnowing fans, sieves, grain baskets, and the staff to run the place, sweepers, preservers, weighers, measurers, supervisors. It reads like a modern warehouse inspection report. This is administrative writing of a kind that almost no other ancient civilization produced in this much detail. Now, scale it up. Across the Mauryan Empire, state-run granaries were built in major cities, with the Arthashastra recommending reserves equal to several years of consumption, both for emergencies and military campaigns. The agricultural economy that fed these granaries was sustained by what is essentially the world's first systematic agricultural income tax. The king's share of the harvest, according to multiple Arthashastra passages, was 1/6 of all crops produced in the empire, paid directly to state granaries. In a fertile country with millions of farmers, 1/6 of the harvest is a staggering amount of food. It funded the army, the bureaucracy, the road network, and the famine reserves, all at once. For the actual march, the Arthashastra contains an entire book, Book 10, called Relating to War. The second chapter is essentially a logistics field manual. It directs the commander to prepare a complete list of villages and forests along the planned route, noting each location's capacity to supply grass, firewood, and water. The march is then scheduled according to these supply points. The text says explicitly that food stocks should be carried at double the quantity required for any expected emergency. If the army cannot carry it all, supplies should be stored at central depots along the route. This is exactly the supply base model that modern militaries still use, written down in Sanskrit roughly 2,000 years ago. The Mauryan elephant logistics alone were a challenge that almost breaks the imagination. A working war elephant eats around 150 kilograms of green fodder, plus supplements like rice, jaggery, ghee, and water, every single day. If you take the Megasthenes figure of 9,000 elephants, that works out to over 1,300 tons of fodder per day. Per day! The Arthashastra has an entire chapter dedicated to the superintendent of elephants, with specific recipes for elephant food and detailed rules for their training and care. The state's investment in war elephants was on the scale that modern militaries invest in tank divisions. The Arthashastra also recognizes that different terrain demands different food and different soldiers. Chapter 4 of Book 10 lists battlefields suitable for infantry, cavalry, chariots, and elephants, with explicit attention to whether troops are trained for desert, forest, valley, plain, mountain, or marsh. The implication is that the Mauryan military was raising regional units adapted to local conditions, which then required regionally adapted supply systems. What's startling about all this is the comparison. The Roman cursus publicus, the famous imperial road system with stations for couriers, was established by Augustus around 20 BCE. The Mauryan road network, with its supply stations, granaries, and government-paid commissary officials described by Megasthenes, was probably operating 2.5 centuries earlier. Megasthenes himself described a Mauryan administrative committee of 30 officials running the imperial army, organized into 6 departments of 5 men each, including a department dedicated to commissariat, the ancient word for military food supply. That is one of the earliest recorded military supply corps in human history. When you put the whole picture together, what you have is a state that taxed 1/6 of all crops across an empire of roughly 5 million square kilometers, stored the food in standardized state-run granaries, distributed it through paid administrative officials, issued it to soldiers in measured rations defined down to fractions of a half-liter volume measure, coordinated supply with troop movements through pre-surveyed route lists, fed 9,000 war elephants alongside the human force, and wrote the whole system down in such detail that a modern army logistics officer could probably read Book 10 of the Arthashastra and immediately recognize what they were looking at. We tend to think the modern military supply chain was invented by Napoleon or by the US Army in World War II. The components of it, the granaries, the standardized rations, the route planning, the supply depots, the dedicated commissariat, were already being written down in Sanskrit while Rome was still a regional Italian power. The first true military logistics manual wasn't European, it was Mauryan. So, tell me below, if you were given Chanakya's job tomorrow, feeding an army of 600,000 with no trucks, no radios, no refrigeration, and only ox carts, riverboats, and clay pots, would you take it or would you turn it down on the spot? Drop your honest answer in the comments. And if you want more stories about the systems that quietly built the ancient world, subscribe to Alternate Past. The next granary is already being inventoried.